This is a Terrazzo threshold mosaic, a company's logo set into the floor of a shop doorway in colored stone and hand-bent brass. There are thousands of them across America. Most are older than the storefronts above them, and almost nobody looks down. This is the story of Terrazzo entrance floors, the brass divider strips that made them possible, and why they outlived everything else on the American storefront. Take one example. In Phoenix, Arizona, there is a Terrazzo entrance laid in 1947 for a men's clothing store called Hanny's. Hanny's closed in 1986. The floor is still there, and when the building reopened as a restaurant, the new owner did not just keep it, he put it on the postcards he handed out to customers. The dead store's own artwork became the selling point for the business that replaced it. That's not a preservation story. Nobody fought for that floor. It survived by accident, and the accident is the interesting part. Start with something you've walked past 1,000 times without questioning. Why does an old shop have a little room before you get inside? Architects call it a recessed entry, or a vestibule. Go up to a storefront built before the Second World War, and you don't step off the pavement through a door. You step into a shallow recess, glass on your left, glass on your right, door set back a few feet from the street. Modern shops don't do that. A modern shop puts its door flush with the pavement because interior floor space is expensive and handing some of it to the street looks like madness. So why did they? The National Park Service, in its preservation brief on historic storefronts, answers it in one line. In the Park Service's own words, the recessed entrance existed not only to protect the customer from inclement weather, but to increase the amount of space in which to display merchandise. Look at what a recess does to the geometry. A flat shop front gives you one straight run of window. Pull the door back 4 feet and you've built 2 more walls of glass angled inward, aimed at the customer as they turn in. You didn't lose selling space. You bought 2 extra windows and paid for them in floor. At Hanny's, those flanking windows held men's suits, and they were lit at night. So the customer is now standing in a funnel, with merchandise on both sides looking at a door. And beneath them is a stretch of ground the public walks on freely, but the shop owns. That's the canvas. It exists because of a decision about window frontage. Spelling a name in a floor is achievable. Drawing a logo is not obvious at all. Terrazzo is an old Italian craft. Venetian terrazzo goes back centuries, born as a way to use marble offcuts, and it came to America with Italian immigrant craftsmen who had carried the trade for generations. The material is stone chips, suspended in cement, poured wet, ground flat, and polished once it cures. Poured, which means it flows and colors in contact with each other, while wet will bleed into one another. Left alone, a poured terrazzo floor can be a beautiful field of speckled color, and that's about all it can be. You cannot draw in it, not without a barrier. And here is where the story turns, because the barrier was not invented for drawing. It was invented because the floors kept cracking. The National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association is blunt about it. Historically, one of the sole objections to using terrazzo floors was cracking. A large slab of cement moves, and when it moves, it splits. European patents for metal dividers go back to 1893. Then, in 1921, an American named Louis del Turco patented the use of metal divider strips in terrazzo, in the language of the patent, to prevent or at least localize cracks. That's the entire purpose. The divider strip is a control joint. Put thin metal strips through the slab at intervals, and when the floor moves, it cracks along the metal instead of wandering across your floor. Plumbing, essentially. But look at what a crack control device actually is. It's a thin strip of brass, sometimes copper or zinc, standing on edge in wet cement, holding one color apart from another, which means it's a line. And, if you can bend it, it's any line you want. The trade worked this out almost immediately. In the National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association's own words, the industry embraced and honored the divider strip, forging a design element out of a functional necessity. By the 1920s, the strips came in brass, copper, and zinc, and craftsmen were bending them by hand around the curve of a letter, around the shape of an emblem, around whatever the shopkeeper's mark happened to be. So a shop's logo in a terrazzo entrance is not really made of stone. It's made of metal. The stone just fills the spaces between the lines. Somebody knelt in that doorway and bent brass into the shape of a company's identity, by eye curve by curve. And they kept doing it that way for 70 years. It was only in the 1990s, the association notes, that computer-cut designs began replacing the fully hand-bent strips of the past. Once you can draw, the question becomes what to draw. And it wasn't only names. The description of a Phoenix terrazzo entrance of this type lists what these designs contained: the business initial, an emblem, the name, the function of the shop, scenes and geometric patterns, all separated by brass strips. Read that list again. The business initial, a monogram, an emblem, a logo. The function, an image telling you what the shop sold, for customers who might not read the sign. Scenes, actual pictures. That's a graphic identity system. It's the same set of assets a company would put on its letterhead, its delivery vans and its packaging, and one copy of it was laid permanently into the ground, where every customer had to walk over it to come inside, which tells you how these owners thought about the floor, not as decoration, as the most durable piece of branding money could buy. Paint fades, glass breaks, awnings rot, signs come down when the lease changes, stone and brass do not. Here's the accident. From the 1940s onward, American storefronts went through a wave of modernization. Ironwork and painted wood looked dated. The new look was flat, smooth, and bright. But almost nobody demolished a storefront to get there. The National Park Service describes what actually happened. New fronts were frequently installed by attaching studs or a metal grid over an early front and applying new covering materials. They built a frame over the old shop and skinned it. The Victorian ironwork is often still behind there. So are the original window frames. Now ask what a crew doing that job does about the floor. Nothing. Screening a facade takes a week of studs and sheet metal. Taking up and relaying a terrazzo threshold is a different trade, a different cost, and it changes nothing a customer notices on the way in. So the sign goes, the window goes, the ironwork gets buried alive. And the logo in the floor, the one element that could not be cheaply covered, simply stays. It isn't there because anyone valued it. It's there because removing it was never worth the trouble. The Federal Manual on Rehabilitating Historic Storefronts runs through cast iron, plate glass, transoms, cornices, signage, awnings, structural glass, aluminium, the 1840s to the 1960s. It does not mention entrance floors at all. Not terrazzo, not tile, not mosaic, not thresholds. The standard reference on saving historic storefronts omits the one component most likely to still be original. I don't think that's a scandal. It's a document about the parts people argue over, the parts that get seen, photographed and fought about at planning meetings. The floor isn't in the argument because the floor was never at risk. It survived by being beneath notice, in the most literal sense the language allows, which is a strange kind of protection. Everything that got admired got replaced. The thing nobody mentioned is the thing still standing. And then, occasionally, it gets noticed again. Architects call what happened next adaptive reuse. Hanny's men's store traded from 1912 and closed in 1986. Its 1947 terrazzo entrance sat under a dead building for 22 years. When the place reopened in 2008 as a restaurant, the new owner kept the floor and printed it on postcards, a logo laid down for a clothing shop, outliving the shop by 40 years, and then going back to work advertising something else entirely. So, next time you're on an old commercial street, look down in the doorways, skip the ones rebuilt flush with the pavement. Those floors are gone. Look for the recessed entry, the little room before the door. That's where the terrazzo survives, and when you find one, look for the metal, the thin brass line running around the curve of a letter or the edge of an emblem. That line is the oldest decision in the whole storefront. Somebody bent it by hand, on their knees in a doorway, to hold two colors of stone apart. It was invented to stop the floor cracking. They used it to sign their name.